Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really undertaking a mission. We're focusing on a foundational question that I think transcends culture and era, really.
It really does.
What is the true, practical, and, I guess, actionable purpose of adopting a religious life?
Right. Not just the theory.
Exactly.
Right.
We're not interested in the easy answers today.
Yeah.
Not the social comfort, not the history lessons, and definitely not just the platitudes. We are diving into sources that provide a really high-demand foundational blueprint, a blueprint for what faith must achieve for you, the individual, to actually secure salvation.
That's absolutely right. For you, the listener, what we've done is stack sources that are centered on this idea of intense spiritual mobilization.
Mobilization, that's the key word.
It is. The material today is drawn from excerpts of The Pursuit of Divine Certainty, and specifically, we're analyzing the deep, very prescriptive writings of the promised Messiah and Mahdi, Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad.
So this is material that doesn't just theorize about faith.
Not at all. It sets a rigorous, but also an achievable standard for what constitutes a successful religious life within Islam. It's really a roadmap for moving beyond just, passive belief.
So we're looking past the intellectual acceptance of a divine reality and moving straight toward what? An existential standard. If we distill all this material down to its core thesis, what is the ultimate non-negotiable goal that we're being told to pursue?
Okay, so the central mobilizing idea is it's stark and it's absolute. The only legitimate purpose of adopting a faith is to acquire absolute, undeniable certainty concerning God.
Okay, not just belief.
Certainty. And the certainty, the source insists it has to be so complete, so profound, that it's described as a conviction as if one can see him with one's eyes.
Wow.
And that right there is the aha moment for you, the learner. Faith isn't meant to be hope or tradition or some kind of philosophy. It must be the attainment of a visual level, sensory conviction that governs every single action.
That standard sounds, well, it sounds impossibly high. It's bordering on literal, verifiable proof.
It is a high bar.
It is. So if that's our starting line, we have a clear journey ahead of us in this deep dive. First, we need to spend some real time defining this level of certainty and why the source demands it as the only acceptable standard.
Right.
Then we have to zero in on the immediate spiritual danger that the certainty is designed to neutralize what the source actually calls the fatal poison of sin.
That's a powerful phrase.
It is. And finally, and this is maybe the most crucial part, we'll dedicate the largest portion of this deep dive to exploring the precise, the practical, and what are called the exclusive methods for achieving this essential mobilizing state. So let's begin by defining that goal.
Let's do it.
The source material is, it's remarkably direct. It states that the true purpose of faith is to acquire certainty concerning God, who is explicitly called the fount of salvation. Let's start with that initial audacious claim, as if one can see him with one's eyes. What does the source gain by setting the bar at sensory perception rather than, 100% intellectual conviction?
Well, what's fascinating here is the implicit rejection of what most people consider faith. Mere intellectual or traditional faith.
The kind you inherit.
The kind you inherit, exactly. Or the kind you reason your way to. Intellectual assent, reading the arguments, accepting the history, that satisfies the mind. But the source recognizes that the mind, even when it's satisfied, is so easily overridden by immediate sensory reality.
Well, that's interesting. So if you believe in God intellectually, but you see a temptation right there in front of you,
the immediate sensory input of that temptation often wins. It's more real in that moment than the abstract idea in your head.
So the conviction has to move beyond the realm of hypothesis and into the realm of, existence.
When I look at the sky, I don't need a philosophical argument to confirm that it's blue. I see it.
Precisely. That's the standard. It demands that the reality of God, his existence, his presence, the reality of his consequences, it has to reach that same level of instinctive, just undeniable knowing.
And that would transform belief completely. It transforms it from a passive mental state, which, can be easily compartmentalized.
Put in a box for Sundays.
Exactly. It transforms it into an active, mobilizing force that dictates your behavior in every single circumstance. If you are certain of God as if you can see him, then his commands become an immediate, undeniable reality, just like that blue sky.
Okay, but what about the specific designation? The fount of salvation. Why not just the creator or the ruler? Positioning God specifically as the fount of salvation seems to elevate the urgency of this whole pursuit.
It absolutely does. By labeling God as the fount, and the inexhaustible source, the origin point of salvation, the source immediately connects the entire purpose of life.
Which is deliverance.
Right, deliverance from destruction and attainment of eternal joy. It connects all of that back to the reality of the divine. So if the goal of religious life is attaining salvation, and that salvation is sourced exclusively from God, then acquiring absolute zero-doubt certainty in that fount becomes the single most pragmatic, most urgent task for you as a believer.
So any lingering uncertainty is a huge problem.
It's a fundamental problem. It means you're questioning the stability, the viability, the very existence of the origin point of your own deliverance. This phrasing establishes God's unchallenged authority. He's the sole dispenser of joy and consequence. There is no other source.
So if the conviction has to be absolute, then the object of that conviction has to be absolute as well. The source requires certainty in a very specific kind of deity, the perfect and living God. We really have to break this down because the specific combination of these two attributes, perfect and living, seems crucial to the ultimate function of the faith.
It's everything. If the goal is visual level certainty and that existential mobilization we talked about, you need both. They're not optional. Let's start with perfect.
Okay, so what practical difference does certainty in God's perfection make for you, the believer, when you're just trying to get through your day and avoid sin?
Well, the attribute of perfect implies his absolute unchanging nature, his complete reliability, his immutability.
He doesn't change his mind.
Exactly. If a believer were to doubt God's perfection, his absolute goodness, his justice, his power, then the whole system of accountability becomes unpredictable.
And an unpredictable system just invites risk-taking. If I think God might change his mind, or maybe he's not watching this time, or maybe he isn't powerful enough to actually follow through on his promise or his threat.
Then you have a window for sin. You have wiggle room.
Right.
Certainty requires the object to be constant. If the promise of salvation, the threat of punishment, if the very rules of interaction were subject to God's imperfection or, his mood swings, then absolute certainty would be impossible to maintain.
You could never fully trust.
Never. So certainty in his perfection is the prerequisite for complete trust. When you, as the believer, know that the judge and the creator are flawless, eternally consistent, and fully reliable, then the foundation for your own self-mobilization is set. This profoundly defines the divine reality. God is the constant against which all these temporary temptations have to be measured.
That makes a lot of sense. Perfection establishes the structural reliability of the divine. But if he were only perfect, he might just be a remote philosophical concept. A perfect engine sitting idle.
A deistic God.
Yeah, that's where living must come in. If certainty requires verifiable interaction now, why is the living quality so essential?
The living quality is what defines the relationship as dynamic and current. It's not a historical relationship. It implies his active, continuous involvement in the present lives of believers.
Right now, today.
Today, a purely historical deity, one who just set the system in motion millennia ago and walked away, would not provide the level of conviction the source demands. I mean, how can you be certain as if you can see him if he is silent or static or remote? You can't.
So the proof of his living quality is the empirical interaction. It's the responses to prayer, the personal revelations, the signs.
Precisely. The living God responds, he reveals, and he actively administers the system of reward and punishment today. This ongoing empirical relationship is what transforms belief from, an academic acceptance of ancient history into an immediate, personal, dynamic experience.
And that's the only thing capable of generating that ultimate sensory equivalent certainty.
It's the only thing. You need certainty that he is real, which is the perfect part, and certainty that he is active, which is the living part. You need both.
Our sources then really solidify this motivational structure. They describe the living God as one who punishes the offender and bestows upon the righteous everlasting joy. This moves the discussion from, abstract theology to very practical consequence.
And this dual role is the operational engine of the faith. We are looking at a system of accountability that is integral to certainty. If God were perceived as perfect, but, passive, never punishing, never rewarding, then even absolute certainty of his existence would lose its motivational punch.
Right. Why shun a sin if the consequence is purely theoretical or, infinitely remote? Accountability has to be felt as immediate and has to be believed in.
And so the certainty isn't just about believing God exists. It's about believing he acts and he judges right now. If I achieve absolute certainty that my choices have eternal, immediate consequences, everlasting joy or immediate punishment, That conviction instantly dictates my behavior.
The motivation becomes purely self-preserving and, I guess, joy-seeking.
Absolutely. The reward, the everlasting joy, acts as the ultimate irresistible pull towards righteousness. It's a magnificent positive inspiration.
And the flip side.
Conversely, the punishment acts as the necessary powerful deterrent. But these two poles, they only mobilize you if your conviction in the source God and your certainty of the outcome are absolute. This framework establishes God's reality as the ultimate arbiter, the one whose decree is the final, undeniable reality.
It fundamentally changes the pursuit. This isn't about cultural compliance or some kind of philosophical searching.
Not at all.
The mission is pragmatic. Acquire certainty to fundamentally change your behavior and secure ultimate joy. So if we fail to acquire this certainty, what is the immediate destructive danger we expose ourselves to?
And that leads us directly to Section 2. It's the fatal poison that this certainty is specifically designed to counteract.
The sources use this really powerful, almost visceral language to describe the spiritual danger. They warn that the wicked spirit of sin seeks to destroy a man. This is not casual terminology.
No, the author is really emphasizing the virulent, deadly nature of disobedience. When the text uses terms like wicked spirit of sin and fatal poison, they're defining sin not as, a list of rules you've broken.
A demerit system.
Exactly. It's defining it as a self-inflicted spiritual toxin. It's a force that is actively seeking to destroy the human being. This highlights the existential seriousness of the problem that faith aims to solve. It's a life-or-death survival scenario.
And the source insists that a person cannot escape the fatal poison of sin till he believes with full certainty in the perfect and living God. This brings us to the core human paradox that we really need to understand here.
Yeah.
If sin is this deadly, this destructive, why do intelligent human beings commit it deliberately? Often, while even acknowledging that it goes against their professed beliefs.
And the source identifies the core deficiency. It's a profound lack of certainty. The spiritual danger is known intellectually, but it lacks the necessary conviction to mobilize that flight response.
It's just idea.
It's just an idea. Meanwhile, the immediate temptation, however fleeting it is, it provides real-time sensory gratification. It feels concrete. The distant spiritual consequence just feels abstract.
So it's a failure of experiential reality.
Yeah.
The consequences of sin are too often treated as a probability, not as a certainty, which is why the sources then pivot to those incredibly powerful, undeniable analogies that are rooted in physical reality.
Right. The text leverages common human experience. It states that people universally avoid things when they have absolute certainty of the fatal effects. The examples provided are no one swallows poison consciously,
Right.
no one deliberately stands in front of a wild tiger, and no one deliberately thrusts his hand into the hole of a serpent.
And these are chosen because they operate completely outside the realm of moral philosophy. They are pure survival instinct, triggered by conviction.
Absolutely. Let's analyze the mechanism of that certainty, starting with the poison. Why is the avoidance instantaneous and absolute?
Because the belief in the fatal outcome is. It's a certainty built on demonstrable, verifiable fact.
You don't need faith to avoid the poison. You need knowledge confirmed by physical reality, and that knowledge automatically dictates the immediate life-preserving action. The conviction is total.
The tiger analogy is even more visceral, I think, because it emphasizes the immediacy of the threat. If a tiger is standing 3 feet away, you don't pause to rationalize or debate whether the tiger is, merely an illusion.
No, the danger is imminent, it's physical, it's overwhelming. The conviction of instant death dictates an instant reflexive flight response. The behavior fleeing is a guaranteed consequence of the certainty.
It's not a choice at that point.
It's not. And the serpent's hole introduces the concept of a hidden danger where the risk assessment is still immediate. Even if you don't see the serpent, the certainty that it might be fatal if it's there is enough to prevent the action. In all these physical examples, the certainty of the consequence is so high that it automatically, without fail, dictates immediate avoidance.
And this leads to the critical spiritual comparison. The source posits that the reason a person commits sin deliberately is because, and I'm quoting, he does not have the same certainty in this matter as he has in other matters of the kind that we have mentioned.
And this is the radical reframing of moral failure. It argues that the behavioral lapse, your willingness to sin, is not a primary failure of self-control or moral aspiration.
It's not about willpower.
It's not about willpower. It's a secondary failure that stems from a profound weakness of conviction about the immediate spiritual consequences.
So sin is committed because the spiritual consequence, the eternal destruction, that fatal poison, it lacks the sensory input. It lacks the immediate visceral reality of the physical threat. People behave as if God is distant or non-existent, even if they say they believe he is near.
The extrapolation is clear. Sin is, functionally, a cognitive malfunction, where you as an individual choose a momentary concrete gratification over the avoidance of a known fatal spiritual consequence. If the danger of spiritual death were as real to your consciousness as a wild tiger in your living room,
You would not hesitate for a second.
not for a second. The core purpose of religion, therefore, is to inject that certainty into the soul, making the spiritual danger feel as immediate, as undeniable, and as certain as the physical one. This is genuine spiritual mobilization.
This analysis, it establishes a really clear practical hierarchy for the believer. We move from just a theological goal to a spiritual obligation.
Exactly. The source establishes this hierarchy with total clarity. It says, the first duty of a person, therefore, is to acquire certainty concerning the existence of God, and to adopt a religion through which this certainty can be acquired so that he should fear God and shun sin.
So certainty is elevated beyond just a benefit of faith. It's the prerequisite duty. It's the starting point for any effective spiritual life.
That's right. Without this sensory equivalent certainty, the necessary motivation to shun sin, which is the fear of God, it can't be genuinely established. You cannot fear the tiger if you are not certain it's real and hostile.
This dramatically shifts the focus of religious effort. It moves the effort away from just, doing rituals or trying to be good.
And it moves it toward knowing God with such totality that the doing, the righteousness, it just naturally and automatically follows.
Yeah.
This pursuit of certainty defines the divine reality. If God is the ultimate consequence and the ultimate reality, then you as a believer must pursue verifiable evidence of that reality before true behavior-changing submission is even possible.
So now that we've established the why avoiding destruction and the what certainty, we have to confront the biggest question for you, the learner, which is the how. How does a person bridge that massive gap between intellectual belief and sensory equivalent certainty?
And for that, we need to look at the exclusive path prescribed by the source.
Okay, so this spiritual strategy, it begins with a really critical list of exclusions. The source tells us directly what will not work. It says it cannot be acquired through mere stories. It cannot be acquired through mere arguments.
Which is huge.
It is. This dismisses, 90% of what modern seekers spend their time on.
It's a profound statement because it forces the seeker away from secondhand information and purely abstract thought. Let's look at why stories, for example, fail to generate the necessary certainty.
Stories are.
Well,
They're historical and inspiring. They build faith through tradition and shared heritage. But they're inherently limited by being secondhand. I could read a detailed account of the miracles of past prophets, but that's a narrative about what God did for them. It's not what God is doing for me right now.
a historical anecdote, no matter how powerful it is always subject to historical critique, to skepticism, or just psychological distance. If the goal is to feel the spiritual danger of sin as acutely as a physical tiger, a story about a long-dead spiritual hero simply lacks the immediate, personal, mobilizing power required.
It's interesting, but not urgent.
Exactly. Stories build inspiration and community, yes, but they cannot replace the verified current experience of the living God that is required to generate that existential certainty.
And then there are the arguments, the vast realm of philosophical debate, theological treatises, logical proofs for God's existence. These are the tools of the intellectually curious, yet the source claims they, too, are insufficient. Why does a logically flawless argument fail to provide that sensory equivalent certainty?
Because arguments establish probability, or possibility, or rational necessity. They satisfy the mind by creating a sound intellectual framework for belief. But certainty, as we're defining it here, has to satisfy the soul to the degree that it immediately overrides base temptations.
It has to win the fight.
It has to win the fight. And a brilliant philosophical proof might leave me 99% convinced intellectually, but it still leaves a critical 1% room for doubt when I'm faced with an immediate, gratifying moral choice.
Let's use a simple modern example. We are all certain of gravity. I can spend an hour delivering a flawless scientific argument for gravity based on physics and mathematics. That's the intellectual assent. But the certainty is when I drop my phone and it hits the floor. The argument established a framework. The experience established the certainty.
That's a perfect analogy. Exactly. Arguments fail because they don't produce that dropped phone moment of undeniable firsthand consequence. If the goal is mobilization fleeing sin, the conviction must be powerful enough to override the immediate sensory reality of temptation. Stories and arguments, while they're valuable foundations for understanding, are insufficient for that level of intense spiritual engagement. Certainty has to be empirical, even if the empirical evidence is spiritual.
Okay, so if intellect and history are ruled out, the source provides 3 exclusive paths that go straight to personal, verifiable experience. The first one is, well, it's perhaps the most audacious. The only way of acquiring certainty is to experience God repeatedly through conversing with him.
And this just elevates the relationship with the divine from, passive reverence or petition to active, verifiable, two-way communication. We are talking about genuine communion,
Conversation.
a conversation where you as a believer address God and God responds through revelation, inspiration, dreams, or signs that convey a specific personal message or direction. This is moving the entire relationship into the empirical realm.
But I have to ask the critical question here, which I think anyone wrestling with this standard must be asking.
Yeah.
How does the source differentiate genuine, verifiable spiritual dialogue from mere delusion or wishful thinking or confirmation bias?
A crucial question.
When a believer says God spoke to them, how do they prove to themselves, let alone anyone else, that this is the sensory equivalent certainty we require?
And that is the essential filtering question. The key lies in the content and the consequences of that conversation. Genuine spiritual dialogue, as implied by the source, isn't just a comforting feeling or a subjective thought. It must have specific, verifiable outcomes.
Meaning the communication has to be predictive,
Right.
or it must lead to an immediate, positive, verifiable change in the external world.
Precisely. If the conversation predicts a future event that subsequently occurs exactly as described, or if the conversation provides specific knowledge that was otherwise unattainable,
Something you couldn't have known.
something you couldn't have possibly known, or if the revelation is so profound and certain that it just shatters all your prior doubt and instantaneously eliminates the desire to commit a deeply ingrained sin, then it carries the weight of certainty. It has to operate outside the realm of coincidence or psychological projection.
So this verifiable interaction serves as indisputable firsthand evidence of the living God.
It does. It establishes God as actively participating in your life as a seeker.
And the inclusion of the word repeatedly is so crucial here. It suggests this isn't a single emotional high. It's a consistent, reliable pattern.
Yes. It's the difference between hearing a bit of static on the radio once and tuning into a crystal clear channel every day for years. That cumulative consistency is what transforms a flash of insight into a reliable bedrock of reality, constantly reinforcing the certainty.
So the constant, direct interaction ensures that the spiritual consequence of sin carries the same weight as the certainty of the tiger, because the existence of the communicator has been empirically proven to you.
And so his warnings become non-negotiable reality.
Moving on to the second method, which really reinforces the first. The only way of acquiring certainty is through witnessing his extraordinary signs. This brings the proof into the visual realm, which aligns perfectly with that goal of seeing him with one's eyes.
This is the external physical proof of God's active living quality. And we need to be really clear about what an extraordinary sign is in this context. It cannot be just a stroke of good fortune or a predictable natural event.
It's not just a lucky break.
Not at all. These are acts or events that decisively defy natural explanation or human capability and point unambiguously to the intervention of the divine.
So we're talking about events that shatter the observer's previous understanding of reality. Something that should be impossible is suddenly made possible.
That is the standard. For certainty to be acquired, the sign has to be specific enough to you, the individual, or the community that doubt is just eradicated. If a person is praying for the removal of a deeply entrenched, lifelong spiritual affliction, a metaphorical poison, and it is instantly demonstrably removed at the exact moment of their fervent prayer.
Wow.
That sudden, impossible cure acts as direct empirical proof of the living God's active involvement and power. The sign is the mechanism by which metaphysical reality suddenly manifests itself in the physical world.
So the difference between a coincidence and an extraordinary sign, then, is the impossibility of the event, coupled with its timing and its relevance to the prayer or the spiritual condition.
Absolutely. Witnessing an extraordinary sign eliminates the need for arguments. If you see undeniable, inexplicable proof of power, whether it's a sudden cure, a miraculous provision, or a clear act of divine assistance, you don't need a philosophical text to prove God's control. You have experienced it. It solidifies God's unchallenged authority as the controller of the universe and the ultimate reality whose laws supersede our human understanding.
This path confirms that the pursuit of certainty is fundamentally empirical. It demands evidence that you process as physical reality, even if the events are spiritual in origin. It's like demanding scientific proof for the soul.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so we've covered direct conversation and direct witnessing, but what about the person who is just starting out, who hasn't yet received that profound direct contact? The third path is crucial for the beginner. The only way of acquiring certainty is by keeping company with someone who has that experience.
And this introduces the concept of spiritual transmission and the indispensable importance of spiritual leadership and community. If you as a seeker are still struggling to achieve direct conversation or witness definitive signs, you can gain certainty through proximity to someone who already possesses it.
How does that experience transfer, though? Is it purely observational, or is there a genuine reflective quality to the association?
Oh, it's highly reflective and transformative. Think of it like learning an incredibly difficult specialized skill. You can read books and watch videos. Those are the stories and arguments.
Right.
But the only way to gain certainty that you can master it is to stand beside a master who is actively performing the skill flawlessly.
The learner observes the practical, behavioral results of the guide's certainty.
Precisely. If you are in the company of a person who genuinely sees God as real, as if one can see him with one's eyes, the effects of that conviction are observable and they are undeniable. The spiritual leader or guide has demonstrably fled the spiritual tiger.
You can see it in their life.
You can see it. Their prayers yield demonstrable results. The conversations and signs we just mentioned, their life is ordered by righteousness, and they exhibit a profound and almost unnatural lack of attachment to sin. Observing the successful, certain life of the experienced one verifies that the path is real and the consequences are true.
So the mentor acts as a living, breathing proof of concept for the living God.
They do. And furthermore, the spiritual environment created by that leader's presence and their teaching helps align your heart to receive your own signs and conversations. The experienced person can help you interpret your nascent spiritual experiences, guiding you through the pitfalls of self-deception until you can stand on your own foundation of verified, first-hand evidence.
It provides a clear, supportive pathway.
Exactly. It helps you bridge that massive gap from intellectual hope to existential certainty.
So if we synthesize these three methods, conversation, signs, and companionship, the message is crystal clear. The pursuit of certainty is a relentless pursuit of empirical, personal, spiritual evidence.
It is. All three of these paths bypass the limitations of secondhand narrative and intellectual probability. They demand direct, verifiable confirmation of the living God's active existence. The source teaches that the fundamental issue preventing righteousness is not a lack of morality, but a lack of reality.
A lack of reality.
We fail because the spiritual world does not feel real enough to compete with the physical world.
And once that certainty is achieved, the avoidance of sin is no longer a constant, exhausting moral struggle.
It's not a struggle at all. It becomes an instantaneous, reflexive action, just like fleeing the sight of a wild tiger. The entire spiritual effort shifts from trying harder to be good to working harder to know God with unshakable certainty.
This framework ensures maximum spiritual engagement and mobilization. The whole structure is designed to establish God's reality as the ultimate fact.
And once that fact is established, righteous action becomes the only logical, self-preserving choice. This elevates the status of the divine by defining religious life as an inherently verifiable, results-oriented endeavor.
We've completed a very deep dive into the source material from The Pursuit of Divine Certainty, and it's been focused entirely on setting this incredibly high bar for religious life. For you, the listener, the key takeaways are, I think, highly pragmatic.
They are. First, the true purpose of adopting a faith is not mere belief, but attaining absolute certainty, a conviction that makes the spiritual world as real and as immediate as the physical world. This is the only standard that guarantees genuine spiritual mobilization.
Second, the certainty is the only effective defense against the fatal poison of sin. We learn that sin is committed not out of weakness of will, but out of a weakness of conviction regarding its inevitable destructive consequences. You avoid the tiger instantly when you are certain it is real.
And crucially, this level of conviction cannot be acquired through abstract arguments or historical stories. Those only offer probability or secondhand inspiration. It is achieved only through three paths of direct, verifiable personal experience: repeatedly conversing with the living God, witnessing his extraordinary signs firsthand, or by keeping company with a spiritual guide who already possesses that demonstrated certainty.
This entire discussion provides an exhaustive roadmap for defining and achieving maximum spiritual engagement. It replaces purely intellectual curiosity with existential, consequence-driven action. The measure of your faith is not how much you know.
But how certain you are of the consequence. The emphasis on certainty above all else changes the very definition of worship, from just ritual performance to inevitable consequence-driven behavior. If you are certain of the judge, you live a certain way.
So here is our final provocative thought for you to carry forward, based directly on the source material. If the fear of a wild tiger is enough to mobilize instant reflexive avoidance, we have to ask ourselves, what practical, observable change would you need to see in your daily life right now, in your immediate choices, in your hidden thoughts, to know that you have truly achieved the certainty required to flee the spiritual danger of sin? What does seeing God with your eyes practically mean for your choices right now? And what evidence are you currently demanding from the divine to eliminate that last shred of doubt?
That is the measure of your conviction and the key to your mobilization.